good afternoon, traders. Hope you've had a successful trading day so far. And as always, hope you've had a smashing start to the week. So, 10 million cases of COVID-19 now confirmed across the world, and supplemented by that 500,000 confirmed deaths. I mean, those are really, really big numbers, and it shows you the severity of the situation here. And it's just an important benchmark that markets need to start looking into more closely. Because up until now, we spoke about this in the previous blog, but what markets have been doing is looking at data coming through in terms of COVID-19 confirmed cases and deaths in percentage terms, and simply comparing that to a 7-day average. So for example, they'd look at Texas, they'd look at the daily cases in Texas, and they just compare it to Texas's 7-day COVID-19 average. And if that average, if the data coming through was below that average, that would encourage a risk on tone. And vice versa. So if that data coming through, I remember this is all in percentage terms, was above that 7-day average, and that would encourage a risk off tone, right? Because that shows an increase in COVID-19 cases against the average. And we spoke about how that was just the wrong way that markets are looking at things from such a sort of small face value perspective, when the severity of the global situation was much more worse. And perhaps this is what the headline is going to do. It's going to help markets to realize that this isn't the case where you look at states like, Texas and California, and you start making changes to market sentiment in terms of risk on or risk off based on those figures. It's about looking at the whole market. It's about looking at global markets, looking at the situation in China, looking at the situation in Australia with their rising cases, and even looking into the developing countries, the ones that are undeveloped as well, like India as well. Just considering the severity of those situations and taking into account the geopolitical risks as well. So US and China tensions still there in the background. You've got now US and EU tensions now kicking off as well. And you just have all these geopolitical tensions, and markets have still been very much vague in terms of whether it's risk on or risk off. And kind of one important observation that I've made over the last 2-3 weeks, and possibly you've made the same observation now as well, but markets have become very much resilient to bad COVID news. And you'll have noticed that when bad COVID news comes through, markets will, yes, sure, go a little bit risk off, safe havens will catch a nice little bit upwards. But then as soon as you have something positive coming through, safe havens drop, yes, and risk effects goes all the way towards the upside. And that kind of tells you that markets right now are in a position where they become a lot more sensitive to positive news and a lot more resilient to negative news. And perhaps that's the reason why we've been seeing a lot of days where it's just risk off, risk on, risk off, risk on, and that sentiment where it's really hard to gauge what the sentiment is in the market. And that's partially why it's been so difficult to trade over the last 2 weeks or so. So going forward then, the fact that, again, we've reached 10 million, we've surpassed that, it's likely going to get worse. For example, in the UK, we've got a lot of researchers saying that come August, September, we're going to experience a sort of secondary wave. We know that the situation in Texas has now gone from bad to worse, and Texas are now having to go back into that sort of lockdown status, and other states as well within the US now considering going back to lockdown, now considering reinforcing some of those initial restrictions. And that's not good, because it's showing a rolling back in the economy as opposed to the sort of recovery. And that's what markets have been rallying on so much. So perhaps what we'll start seeing is markets looking at this from a more global perspective, as opposed to selecting on small little bits of data. And yes, even states like Texas, of course that data is important, but it's a small piece and a much more, part of a much more bigger picture, a much more bigger puzzle.